I tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Jake.
I'm Rosie.
And welcome to our 2017 update podcast in January 2018, perversely. Here we catch up with a few points of interest and or additional thoughts about some of our previous podcasts. Going down the list I've made in the order of podcast first release, we begin with The Mysterious Cities of Gold, one of our very early podcasts from 2016. A couple of things to say about that, the first of which was an interesting theory or
observation
that Rosie picked up and will now tell us about.
Well, you see, it's during this bit in the series where they're staying with the Amazons and have to sort some things out for them. In fact, the main thing they have to sort out, or perhaps the only thing, I can't remember now, is that the evil Amazon who uses a barometer to predict the weather and pretend it's magic and that she knows which people the gods want sacrificed, tells the queen that a certain girl, a child, must be sacrificed, and her name is Morka, and she says to the queen that Morka is a servant and your favourite, I think. And when we watched it before, I noticed, but I didn't take the thought any further, that Morka looks slightly like the queen. She's got the same colouring. And I particularly noticed the queen has these sort of elaborate braids of long hair, and Morka has a sort of miniature version of that haircut with little kind of bunches, and I thought, oh, she looks kind of like the queen. Maybe they're trying to imply that that's the sort of look that they have in this tribe. But then this time, the further thought occurred that perhaps Morka was supposed to be the queen's daughter, and those uptight French adapters / translators changed it. And it would make a certain amount of sense that the queen would react in the same way, essentially, to having her daughter sacrificed as having her favourite servant sacrificed, i.e. she wouldn't be very pleased about it. And I thought to myself, why would they change that? I thought of two possible reasons. It could be either one, it could be both, it could be something else. I think the first one is more likely, that the French, with all their prudishness and trying to make things a bit more suitable for a young audience as they see it, might think it wasn't right for the queen essentially to agree to having her own daughter sacrificed in order to appease the gods and because of traditions and things, even though obviously she would be very unhappy about it. I also wondered if maybe they didn't want to imply anything about reproduction, even though it's obvious that they must have some. They didn't want any actual mothers and daughters and implying any unmarried sex. Maybe they're not quite as prudish as that, I don't know. But that's what I thought anyway, and after finding out some of the things that the French did change, it seems to me quite likely that I'm right.
And I found that a very interesting and undoubtedly true observation. Japanese designers and animators, I think, did try to make it a lot more intense and hardcore than the French were ready for. They snuck some things under the radar that we talked about in our podcast, like Zia getting boobs and Esteban getting all buff and Zia reaching for Esteban's junk when she's scared and that sort of thing. And I think that's definitely another one, and a very interesting one, and an extra dimension to look out for if you ever watch the couple of Amazons episodes in The Mysterious Cities of Gold. Something that occurred to me while we were watching The Mysterious Cities of Gold earlier this year reminded me of when we were saying on our podcast how Shiraz, who played Esteban in English, improved so much with his reading of the funny calligraphy during the recording process. And it really struck me how, by the time we get to that sort of time with the Amazons and things like the Doctor and Marinche turning up, Shiraz is really just as good and proficient with the funny calligraphy reading machine as Zia and Tao, Janice and Adrian. Of course, Shiraz still has the advantage of the absolute purity and conviction in his voice, which makes his later performance as Esteban one of the great voice acting performances ever, in my opinion. The example I thought of on our original podcast for a bit where he'd improved so much was when he was going, "The Olmecs haven't won yet. Not yet," which I always remember as being a very good piece of acting, voice acting. But even earlier on, there was more that I thought he was doing very well and thinking about very carefully, like the bit where they're finding some stones that they have to move on this wall to make some mechanism happen, and Shiraz is going, "2 diagonals, it's that one up there, look," and things like that. Of course, when he's saying things like, "All right, I promise you, Zia," it's absolutely wonderful conviction still in his voice. So he deserves even more praise, Shiraz, than we gave him on the original podcast, and there it is. The next thing on the list is Watership Down, which even was mentioned in our previous podcast, the Mummy podcast, as something that we were going to talk about in this one, because it was supposed to be on telly over Christmas, the new 4-part adaptation, which we did mention on our Watership Down podcast, and was supposed to be on over the 2017-18 festive season. But it wasn't.
You read the TV listings guide first, before I did, not before anyone else in the country probably, but before me, and told me there was no sign of Watership Down, and I was furious because for about 2 years I've known that it was supposed to happen, and I've been looking forward to it, hoping it would be good, at least looking forward to knowing either way, because a true to the book miniseries, as I think I said on the podcast, needs to exist for fans of the book who want a proper length, everything gets done properly adaptation, and I'm really quite cross that it's evidently been postponed. It couldn't have been cancelled. They've made it, as far as I know, at least they've recorded the voices, without any explanation at all, and I've been searching Watership Down 2018 on the internet every few days, not every day, and one thing I found was an article by Pan Macmillan saying, "We're publishing a tie-in edition of the miniseries, which will air in the second half of 2018. And from that, it seems quite likely it's going to be next Christmas. I mean, Easter would be the first half of 2018, and then why would they show it at a time which wasn't a holiday, a special occasion? Maybe they'll show it before Christmas, maybe they won't. But I'm sort of expecting it to turn up around Christmas now." And then a few days after this, somebody updated the Wikipedia page, which had said due to air in 2017 or at the end of 2017 or something like that, was supposed to air at the end of 2017. But this has been postponed to the second half of 2018, and the citation included is that Pan Macmillan article. So apparently the only group of people who seem to know anything is Pan Macmillan, and they're not telling us very much.
So that's probably, hopefully, something to talk about on the next update podcast. Perhaps it'll be quite fresh in our minds then. It's on over the next festive season. But very disappointing, BBC and whoever else is involved.
Netflix.
You've let us all down and you've let yourselves down, quite frankly. But a surprise literary adaptation that was in the TV listings for Christmas magazine instead was a 3-part adaptation of Little Women, which I was interested to see and knew that Rosie would be interested to see. And she enjoyed it, didn't you?
Yes, in fact, 15 minutes ago, approximately, I finished watching again on catch-up the second episode. I shall watch the third one later, and I watched the first one yesterday because I wanted to see it again. I knew that overall I had enjoyed it the first time. I'm enjoying it more the second time, I think, because the first time things were coming up and I was thinking, oh, that's not like it. Oh, they've done that a little bit wrong. Oh, that's a bit of a strange interpretation. But now that I'm prepared for those things, they're not marring my enjoyment, and I can overlook pretty much everything except Aunt March lending Marmee the money to go to Washington. She's absolutely rolling in money, and she knows the Marches, she is a March, but the main Marches don't have very much. And in the book and in all the adaptations, she gives Marmee the money. I think it very odd that she's going to start demanding to be paid back, so that's quite annoying, but oh well, there it is. Marmee said lent, and I think it was her. There's nothing we can do about it. Overall, I think the cast is very good. I've read a few reviews online, and everyone's all over Emily Watson as Marmee, and I guess she's okay. I like, in particular, the guy who's playing Laurie. He's called Jonah Hauer something or other. Double barrel. And I like Meg as well, who's played by Willa Fitzgerald, and as you might be able to guess from her name, she's actually an American. And I didn't know until after I looked it all up on the Internet Movie Database afterwards, which ones of them were American and which ones weren't. And as far as I remember, Joe, Meg, and Amy are all real Americans, and everyone else is English or Welsh or Irish, possibly. And I can't tell the difference just listening to them. Some of them are doing the accent and some of them are using their own accent. But I expect Americans can tell, but I can't, so it doesn't worry me. The person who isn't bothering to do any accent is Michael Gambon, and I was pretty unimpressed with him, actually. He's one of these actors who has been acting for a long time, and everyone says, oh, isn't he wonderful, isn't he brilliant? But actually, he just does everything the same. If you are asked to play Dumbledore, and then you're asked to play Grandfather Lawrence, and you do them both exactly the same, you've gone wrong somewhere, quite frankly. It's also got Angela Lansbury as Aunt March, and I did think she was good. It's got Uma Thurman and Ethan Hawke's daughter, Maya Hawke, as Jo, and she is good too, and everybody's at least adequate, except Michael Gambon, and I think it's got a good atmosphere. I like the score. It's something I'm quite looking forward to coming out on DVD to add to my collection, because in the Little Women podcast I was analysing in great depth how the adaptations reflect the different styles of acting and directing and general movie and television making of their time, and this one is quite 2010s, but not too 2010s. They don't start crying and punching each other in the face unnecessarily or saying silly, over-embellished lines because the writer thinks she's being clever. So I guess it was quite a good time to make it, really. And it's got quite a lot of bits which are true to the book and uses dialogue from the book. They don't always interpret it in exactly the way I would, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing it wrong. It's also sort of changed around the order of some things, and it's not perfect, but no adaptation of Little Women actually is, even the 1994 one, which I like best.
So there we are. As one door closes, another door opens in terms of Christmas adaptation telly. But hopefully the door is only ajar on Watership Down, and we'll come back to it in our next update podcast. Next on my list is Hey Arnold. We sat and watched many episodes of Hey Arnold that we've had on video for 20 years in preparation for Hey Arnold, the Jungle movie. I was getting quite a new wave of enthusiasm about Hey Arnold, or Arnold and Helga, in the run-up to the Jungle movie, and I wanted to watch some favourite episodes, and there were a couple of interesting things to note about watching the videos, chief one being that I found I didn't really enjoy the bits that weren't Helga, which is quite a lot of bits, fortunately, and or Tora and Cordell as Arnold. Anything else didn't really speak to me anymore, and I think I did used to enjoy more aspects of it more than I do now. So overall I found the experience a bit, okay. And then I was very interested to spot that one of the season 5 episodes, Big Bob's Crisis, where Big Bob Pataki thinks he's had a heart attack, but it's actually gas, was obviously designed as a backdoor pilot for the Patakis, which we've talked about a lot in our Hey Arnold podcast. And, well, that's more examples of Craig Bartlett assuming he's going to get all the shows and episodes he wants and not actually ending up with them.
Back in the day when the Patakis was, so it seemed, a real possibility, even though I didn't have that thought, I didn't really know about backdoor pilots, I did find myself thinking of that episode when thinking about or reading about the Patakis and kind of thinking, I guess it'll be a bit like Bob's Crisis then.
Yes, it's very noticeable that Olga's there just as a matter of course, whereas in other episodes with Olga they have to say, oh, she's back from college, she's back from Alaska, whatever. It's the first one where we're like, oh, here's the Patakis just going about their normal life and here's an episode about them. I was moderately pleased to spot that in that episode, Big Bob made the effort to stop himself from calling Helga Olga and call her Helga instead, which I thought was supposed to be a lead-in to some sort of development to a better relationship between Helga and Big Bob, particularly, perhaps the rest of her family. So, to see that development completely abandoned would be a shame, wouldn't it? We'll come back to that in a moment. But Hey Arnold, the Jungle Movie aired as promised in the USA on Thanksgiving, the 24th of November 2017, and we had thought that it was rather unlikely that it wouldn't very soon after that air internationally, but it didn't, and it hasn't, and the latest thing I've spotted about that is an air date for Canada, the 5th of January 2018. Now, what is the thinking at Nickelodeon behind holding back this Hey Arnold reboot or nostalgic special episode, which hopefully is all it is, and going by the ratings it's apparently got, should be all it is. What's the thought behind holding that back internationally when we've got the internet? We both wanted to wait until it was on TV in this country, but we didn't in the end because, you know, if you want to see it, you're going to find a way to see it online. Well, it's not difficult. Several links to where it had been uploaded and things. And if companies like Nickelodeon don't want viewers to do that, watch things online when they really shouldn't, they need to put them on as soon as possible. Otherwise, with the World Wide Web, people are going to watch them from all over the world, aren't they? It's like when they moved Neighbours to the same day in the UK as in Australia, because apparently there was this group of Neighbours fanatics in the UK who illegally watched it the day it aired in Australia, and I can't really understand why you'd want to do that with Neighbours specifically, not even in the days of Scott and Charlene, or even Todd and Josh. But I can understand why one might want to do it with some shows, and we certainly didn't want to wait around to see when the movie database was going to say to us, oh yes, UK air date for Hey Arnold, the Jungle Movie, from in 25th of June or something. So we have watched it, not through official channels, and up yours, Nickelodeon, for not giving us the chance to do it within a reasonable timescale, and even Canada has waited a month and a half, and the rest of the world, God knows when. I just can't understand the thinking behind that. I'd actually watched a few clips of the Jungle Movie that people had put on YouTube shortly after it aired, which soon got taken down, and I liked it more when I'd watched those clips than when I'd actually sat and watched the whole thing through. The whole thing, I was expecting to be able to sit here and say, well, it was mostly awful, but I quite like this, I quite like that. This bit was okay, this reminded me of that. But actually, the entire thing was terrible. Absolutely terrible. Let's go over to Rosie now to see if she has any specific terrible things to say about it.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about a couple of things. I'm wondering how much to reveal and in what order. I suppose the first thing to say is that I was disappointed that Eduardo wasn't evil after all. I think that was probably the biggest blow for me because there are issues with the Arnold and Helga relationship, but where that's concerned, I have to admit I never completely trusted Craig Bartlett in the first place, whereas I did think he would not feel he was burning any bridges or ruining any future products by revealing that Eduardo was evil after all. And there's this character, La Sambra, the kind of pirate person who's after treasure and stuff, who's pretending to be Eduardo. And this character is clearly evil. And I'm thinking, oh yes, maybe Eduardo's evil. And then he's going, ha ha, I'm not Eduardo, I'm La Sambra. And I'm thinking, oh, I hope he actually is Eduardo, and it's a double bluff saying he's not Eduardo, he's La Sambra, because why shouldn't they be the same person? I'm sure his parents didn't call him La Sambra. And then a bit later, he's like making Arnold and Helga and Gerald fall over a cliff and stuff. And Eduardo turns up to save them, and he is a good guy. And when he put them in a dodgy cable car, evidently he didn't do it on purpose and hope they'd be killed. Arnold's parents, I mean by them. So that was disappointing, which has made me remember as well the whole reason why they didn't come back was because they'd caught this sleeping sickness that they were trying to cure. And the whole thing didn't really make any sense because they found a cure, and evidently they had made the cure, and the way that the kids saved everyone in the village, it was just the adults and the children were running the village, and the way that the kids were saving them was to trigger this device that you put the cure into and make it rain over the whole village. And I said, given that the young people who don't have the sleeping sickness didn't figure out how to do that, couldn't they have administered it in small doses? They could have at least given it to Arnold's parents in the small doses, and then they could have made the rain machine work. It just doesn't make sense.
I know, it's funny, Arnold's standing there and saying, how are we going to get this cure to them? This cure that is literally 2 inches away from my pointing finger.
You could sort of pick it up and carry it to them, couldn't you, Arnold?
It's very strange, and that's just one very strange aspect of it. I was surprised and a little disappointed to see that the runtime was only an hour and 20 minutes. And I think when Craig was making his scripts and recording the dialogue and things, he probably imagined it was going to be somewhat longer than that, because it is extremely squished. And what is squished in is also all rather bad, most of it. But there's a lot supposed to be going on in there. There's supposed to be this rift between Arnold and Gerald that is so quickly skipped over. There's supposed to be this bit where Helga abandons her locket and Brainy saves it and it's really significant. It all happens in about 2 seconds. There's supposed to be funny, which it isn't, bits and characterization for all the other kids in the class, for Olga and the guy on the boat who she's supposed to be falling in love with, and the other 2 guys on the boat who are supposed to be voiced by the Arnold and Gerald voices originally, and they don't really say anything, either of them, in the final cut.
I don't remember them saying a word.
There's just too much in there, and it's all rubbish anyway, and it's been squished up into this incomprehensible mess that was an absolute excruciating watch, and I thought was about the worst relaunch of Hey Arnold possible. I'll come back now to what I was saying about Big Bob and Miriam in it. They were back to, we have to go and save Olga, and then they're driving off, and the other one, what's her name? I've forgotten. What a step back that was. And obviously it means he's abandoned the Patakis as an idea for now.
It's even a step back from where they were some way into the series, because, okay, they don't take a lot of notice of Helga, but when she is in mortal danger, then they should, like when she's gone missing, run off from their Thanksgiving. They're all running around, phoning the police, making flyers, wanting to find her. And it really is too much, but I think the thinking behind it was, right, I need to show the new audience what the relationship between Helga and her family is, and I need to do it in about 5 seconds because I've got all these other things I'm trying to do as well. We noticed, or perhaps it was just me, I remember pointing it out anyway, that when we were watching episodes such as Helga on the Couch that Craig Bartlett had written, he really wasn't one of the better writers. I noticed in particular that his jokes fell very flat, and also he wasn't much on actual character development, as we can see from the film. And after what happened with Hey Arnold the movie, with Arnold and Helga, as I said, I just didn't trust him with it. But I never dreamed it would be as bad as that.
Yes, it's very much an attempt to satisfy old fans and potential new fans, and in our view at least, it's a long way off being the right sort of thing to satisfy either, as that thing you were saying about Helga and her family attests. I think for the main plot, it needed a lot of trimming down. I think it was clinging on to a lot of original ideas from when it was going to be a theatrical movie that he needed to get rid of. One I suggested was getting rid of having the whole class coming to San Lorenzo and just concentrate on getting Arnold, Helga, Gerald, maybe Phoebe, give us some decent screen time there, and do this, like, quest with the journal and the secret bits of the map and the traps to dodge. I mean, I thought that had some potential. But again, like everything else, it was so quick and so skipped over. And like Nightmare Series 8, it's ended up as a huge mess.
Where the time they spend in their city is sort of equivalent to Daniel's quest in Series 8. They spend far too much time on that, and then they get to the next bit, and it's a sprint to the finish and falls over itself, quite frankly.
Yes, terrible, terrible. I think it has, as I was intimating just now, quite some potential, but for me it's vastly unrealised. And that really is the general points about it before we round off with the specifics about Arnold and Helga.
So what happens, just to give you a bit of context, is that in order for this pure rain machine to work, they have to put this MacGuffin in called the Heart of Gold, which ought to be, symbolic of Arnold's Heart of Gold. I don't think they really explained that or made that clear enough or tied the ideas together of the literal Heart of Gold and the metaphorical Heart of Gold. But anyway, that goes over the cliff with La Sambra, I think, doesn't it?
Yes.
So they have to put Helga's locket in it, and they do this whole thing. It's just gold-plated. It's not pure. And Arnold's going, I think your heart is purer than you think, or something like that. And so she gives it to him with the picture of him in it, and they put it in the machine, and I think there's some, oh no, it's not going to work, and then it does, and then all the people wake up because this cure has been rained on them that's been there for the past 11 years or whatever it is. And then, that's all right, actually, isn't it? That would be quite palatable. But then he starts going up to her and saying, oh, thanks for putting your locket in the thingamy, Helga. As it very much were. And she's going, locket? What locket? And we're like, you just put it in his hand. How can you deny that it exists? And then, they decide to be a couple and they kiss and all that kind of thing, and then they go home and they're walking to school. Helga and Phoebe, Arnold and Gerald, they meet up. Gerald and Phoebe hold hands in the school. Arnold takes Helga's hand and she snatches her hand away and says, who said you could touch me? And I was like, oh, they should hold hands to school. And then there's people on the internet, and whilst I don't want to put words in their mouths, and perhaps I'm wrong, but I'm going to suggest that they are making an interpretation that they find palatable in order to come to terms with it obviously being a load of complete crap. What they say is, oh, I'm glad Helga did that because it shows that she's still got her edge and that kind of thing. And I just think, no. She should hold his hand in the school, and then to show that she's still Helga and she's still hardcore, something could happen like Harold laughs at them and she goes up to him and punches him in the face, and that would be much better. It's clearly Craig trying to hedge his bets and give himself the opportunity to have further conflict in their relationship, whatever that may be. And you read something, didn't you, about an idea he had about that?
Yes, what you've said there is absolutely right. It would have been a fantastic ending. And I'll now just come at it from how I saw it unfold and then go on to what you're talking about just now. I actually watched the last 4 minutes of the movie on YouTube before watching anything else, and that was when I liked it more than when I'd seen the whole thing all the way through. I saw the bit where Arnold was saying, your locket, and Helga was going, locket? What locket? And then it pops out of the machine, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, but of course I hadn't realised at that point that she'd already put it in his hand, and so saying, locket, what locket, was completely stupid. And then I saw Arnold telling his feelings to Helga, which I thought was quite nicely done. I liked the way referenced Hey Arnold the movie originally, which proper Hey Arnolders, real Hey Arnolders know he's referencing the movie there, but new fans are obviously supposed to think he's referencing the stupidly redundant bit in The Crow's Nest, which turned out to be very disappointing earlier in that same Jungle movie. And then, of course, you get the kiss, and I liked that when I first saw it for a couple of reasons. One has been able to find on the internet over the past 10, 15 years lots of fan art of Arnold doing his kiss to Helga in the jungle that was so widely publicised to be the big climax, as it were, of the Jungle movie. And in all those fan arts I've seen, it is Arnold kissing Helga. She looks surprised by it. And, fair enough, that was as it was described by Craig in the interviews 10, 15 years ago. But what I liked about the final version of the kiss in the Jungle movie was that it wasn't that Arnold had kissed Helga, it was that they had kissed each other, which I thought was better. Arnold does his "here's how I feel" and takes her hands, and then they both move in for the kiss rather than either of them doing it to the other one, which I like. And I was also a bit disappointed when Craig originally described it was going to be a brief kiss before being interrupted by Gerald. I thought, it's a proper long one, and Helga raises her leg like Maude and everything, and even Arnold raised his leg a bit. And I timed it on YouTube, and it lasted at least 7 seconds, anything up to 10, depending on when they actually stopped after Gerald turned up and went, So at that point, I was fairly enthused and got quite a bit of satisfaction out of the kiss scene. And then, of course, I saw the bit where we're back in Hillwood, and I thought, good, we're back in Hillwood. We're not doing what Craig threatened to do and have Arnold stay in the frickin' jungle, which makes no sense. And I thought, well, perhaps I'd rather see any ending back in Hillwood than an ending where Arnold stays in the jungle. And then Arnold's parents are being all clingy at the end, and they're following him to school, and he's like, I'm trying to go to school, leave me alone. And there was this bit I enjoyed where Helga and Gerald give each other this look, like, did we do the right thing? Arnold's parents seem a bit mad, actually. Maybe we should have left them where they were. That would have been better for Arnold. And I like that moment between Helga and Gerald because it has history in the show. They are his two greatest, friends, even though he didn't originally know that about Helga. His two greatest allies who've been through so much to help him. And they exchange this look like, what? Were we right? Parents are nutters. And then, of course, you get that hand rejection scene like Rosie was describing, and my initial reaction to that was, for goodness sake, Helga, Arnold is actively attempting to have a romantic relationship with you after all this time. What are you doing chucking him off? And I think, yes, as you say, absolutely right. People like to interpret that as, they're a couple and that shows her edge. But really, it's not the right ending and a very disappointing one. And I read on DeviantArt with someone who made a screen cap of this kiss, as you were describing, saying, I love that bit, Helga's edge, that sort of thing. I say it's perfectly possible, Craig, to have Arnold and Helga as a couple and be nice to each other and still maintain their individual characters. And you can have a look at my fanfic on DeviantArt to see how, if you like. There are lots of DeviantArt links in the Olden Days podcast blurbs, and you can find the appropriate gallery, Craig, and see how it should be done. This idea that Craig has, and some fans are writing it too, that Arnold and Helga are opposites and have clash of personalities, I think that's bull poop. They're not, in essence, opposites. They just had different ways of expressing themselves based on how their lives have been panning out. But when they come together, being the purest two souls in existence, they should mesh very nicely and not have all this conflict and clash that Craig seems to want them to have. And that is, as you were mentioning, what I was reading in an interview with Craig, where he was saying, yes, I'd love to do a season 6 and have Arnold and Helga as a couple, but they would always be having a personality clash and having strife and turbulent relationship, and it would be great fun. Well, I don't want to see that. And neither, it seems, does Franny, Francesca Marie Smith, who voices Helga. I read an interview with her the day after I'd watched the last 4 minutes of the Jungle movie, saying, I would like to see I'm going to paraphrase her, of course, but the word she actually used was grounded. I would like to see Helga now very grounded by her relationship with Arnold. I would like to see her calming down, discovering her soft side, showing it to other people, showing it to Arnold, and be, as I say, grounded, because I think it's time for her to do that. And I agree wholeheartedly with Franny and refute Craig's vision completely.
No one knows Helga better than Franny, and I'd have to say, no one knows Helga worse than Craig.
So if you're listening, Franny, you get together with us and we'll do some sort of audio series.
We can't pay you though, sorry.
Yes, it's purely amateur, but you're a lawyer or something, aren't you? So it shouldn't be a problem for you. And we'll really show Craig how grounded Helga can be.
Torrin Cordell, are you in?
That's right, he's been interviewed saying, I can't do the Arnold voice anymore. But it doesn't matter, Torrin. You just come and read the lines with your wonderful conviction and we'll pitch them up, and it doesn't matter if it sounds different. Wow, wouldn't that be wonderful? Speaking of Arnold's voice, I thought Mason Vale Cotton in the Jungle movie gave a very sensitive performance as Arnold.
I thought he was good.
I thought he was really thinking about Arnold's motivation and feelings and bringing them through very nicely. And perhaps he's my second favourite Arnold after Torrin. I think there were some bits where he was a bit lost about when Arnold was talking about relationships and things that had happened that Mason probably didn't know what was supposed to be going on. But I think everything he did was very sensitive, as I say. But I didn't like the new voice of Gerald. I thought that was very plop out the lines. But there we go. The voice work, all of it, would have been perfectly adequate if the movie had been better. So yeah, Craig obviously has his vision for the future, which he wants to make in a season 6, and let's hope he doesn't get to. We all have our visions for the future, and I still like mine that I made up on my fan fiction much more than Craig's. So there it is, Hey Arnold the Jungle movie. It got made very badly, it didn't get shown in all different countries as it should be, and hopefully Hey Arnold, in my heart and mind, can be laid to rest there, because quite frankly, it has no sort of future that I'd be interested in engaging with Craig at the helm. And I don't imagine I shall ever want to watch Hey Arnold the Jungle movie again. I can't conceive it at all, can you?
No.
So there it is. Full analysis, and that's the end of Hey Arnold. Back to the Future, the animated series. We were just starting to get into watching that when we did our update podcast last year, and I think Rosie agreed pretty much with my analysis that it's okay for what it is, doesn't match up perfectly with the film, but then no cartoon of a film franchise ever does, and it's an enjoyable romp, but not that memorable. And there were a couple of things Rosie said about it that I thought were true and memorable. Like one thing you said was, which I'd already kind of said on the podcast, so you obviously agreed, the best thing about it is those kids. Do you remember saying that?
No, I don't, but I do remember thinking something along those lines.
As I was saying in our Back to the Future podcast, Jules and Vern very much bring it to life and become protagonists, despite the fact that people who want to match it up completely with the movies go on Wikipedia and start putting all over the place, Marty's the protagonist, Marty's the main character, even though he isn't.
Yes, that line you liked when Jules and Vern are having an altercation and Jules goes, well, I'm telling Mother. It's particularly good because whoever wrote the script just wrote, well, I'm telling Mother, and never dreamed he'd give it an amusing interpretation like that.
So again, as in our original podcast, props to Josh Keaton and Troy Davidson for making Back to the Future, the animated series, the best it could be in many ways. I was particularly amused when we were watching the episode called Forward to the Past, which is about going back in time and accidentally stopping the destruction of the dinosaurs. And you said to Doc, oh, you idiot, now there's going to be dinosaurs, when they were going home. And I said, well, you've got this episode sussed, haven't you?
Yes, it was this meteor falling to Earth, and they were going, oh, we better stop that meteor falling to Earth then. It was pretty obvious what was about to happen.
So we had some amusing moments like that watching it, and some interesting discussions, and certainly worth watching on a few American VHSs and getting some enjoyment out of from time to time. Next on the list is Animaniacs. We did our Warner Brothers animation podcast at the beginning of 2017, and Animaniacs was mentioned at great length. And interestingly, a few months ago, we found some episodes of Animaniacs on TV on demand. which we sat and watched. And they were some of the early episodes, and it was an extremely interesting experience. Rosie was very bored with the Wheel of Morality by the end of it, which is something that ends some episodes with a random lesson, which has absolutely nothing to do with what happened in the episode.
It gets rather samey coming up with an amusing thing from the Wheel of Morality. We particularly enjoyed Buttons and Mindy.
What I've written on here that was interesting and unexpected was that Buttons and Mindy was the thing we enjoyed most. This mad cat rushing around after Mindy. Mindy jumps out of the aeroplane because her lollipop's fallen out.
Mindy was confirmed as a girl, and I did start to wonder, why did we ever think she might be a boy? Mindy is a girl's name, and then I thought perhaps it was the fault of Stephen Mulhern, because he used to go around saying he about characters he wasn't sure about, such as Teeny Weeny and Bimble's Bucket, who was confirmed as female in the show.
And I thought it might be something to do with Nancy Cartwright doing the voice, which I didn't realise it was before we had a look at the casts on those on-demand episodes, because usually when you hear Nancy Cartwright doing that kind of voice, she's being a guy. Bart Simpson, FX, Rufus the Mole Rat. The other girl she did that we eventually thought of was the daughter character on God, the Devil and Bob, which nobody knows because it was cancelled and never shown in the US after about 2 episodes. And we enjoyed the other bits as well, Rita and Rund.
Yes, they were doing this Les Miserables parody, and you and I don't even know Les Mis, do we? So we didn't really get why it was like the original, and it was a little bit boring. And then Runt turns up singing his catchphrase, definitely, and that made us kill ourselves laughing. Runt came along and saved the show in that case.
I like the bit where he's running after all the tomatoes and going, wow, loads of balls, definitely balls, and things like that. We enjoyed that Animaniacs, and those were some memorable bits.
The jungle movie was definitely balls, wasn't it?
Yes. Next on the list, The Crystal Maze, which, as was mentioned in our Crystal Maze podcast, has had a kind of reboot. A new series with Richard Ayoade as host, spurred by the success of the Stand Up to Cancer Celebrity Special. But for this, they've actually bothered building a new Crystal Maze set instead of doing it in the Crystal Maze experience. But it obviously doesn't have the budget and production value of the original show, which isn't a bad thing, I'm not saying that, but it does come across as a parody takeoff of the original show to me, rather than a continuation of it. And the way that it's presented as a bit of, wasn't it a bit crap, let's laugh at it, isn't our new set a bit crap, let's laugh at it, really backs that feeling up, in my opinion.
I think that has a lot to do with the way that humour is nowadays. If ifs and buts were candies and nuts, but if there was no Crystal Maze in the 90s, or humour was the same in the 90s, I reckon they would have been making the same kind of jokes. I like it though, I enjoy watching it because I want to see the games and what's going to happen, and if people are any good at them. And yes, the 90s Crystal Maze is better, but if someone said to me, would you like to watch a new episode of New Crystal Maze, or an episode from the 90s, I'd probably choose a new episode because I know the 90s one so well now. I know exactly what's going to happen, whereas I do like not knowing what's going to happen in the new ones.
Yes, I like the new one too, and Richard has his advantages as a host. He brings out the best in some of the teams who might be a bit boring or a bit cocky or a bit thick otherwise. He has to say a bunch of, look at this crap stuff humour, because that's, as you say, how things are nowadays. But they certainly could have done a lot worse with their host casting. And some of the games quite good, some of them are less good.
Much like the original.
Yes. And it's interesting to spot some of the ideas they've had and see how some are like the original and some aren't. Some games get overused, like bouncing the apple on the tree, all the apples on the tree, just like in the original series, some things got overused. And some games I'd like to see more, like the game in future where you get asked the riddles by the head in the jar, whose name is the Riddle Master, but he's always credited as Jarhead, which I think is a much more stupid name for him. One thing that would improve it a lot for me would be if they bothered to create the illusion of it being the Crystal Maze rather than 5 separate sets. Problem is, you can get from any zone to any other zone in this new version of the maze by going from any entrance or exit. So you might pop out of the wall in Aztec and turn up in Medieval, which doesn't create the illusion of the Crystal Maze as it should. And that would add a lot to the show for me if they bothered to do that.
And didn't we buy into that as children? Fooled me completely for years. With the teleporter in future, they've given themselves the opportunity to mix it up a bit more than they used to. Like, for example, you could go medieval, future, industrial, Aztec, which you never used to be able to do with the route around the maze. And I can't really see the point of not doing it properly, especially as they have the map that shows you how it supposedly all fits together.
It makes it very obvious that it's 5 separate sets, which it always was, rather than a continuous crystal maze, which it used to appear to be. The Crystal Dome isn't much fun anymore.
It has no door. I don't know how they get in. They must dismantle it and get them to stand there and lower it on top of them or something. Never see them enter.
There's no water in Drawbridge, which is less fun but probably safer, and it's too small. It's even more of a letdown as an end game than ever before. But certainly, most reboots are much worse, and I've written on here pros and cons, and that's what we've said about the Crystal Maze. Some pros, some cons, but overall, fun to watch and worth having, and an interesting piece of nostalgia in a modern setting that's sometimes a bit annoying, but very typical of the modern world. The next thing on the list is Gladiators. Usually when we record a podcast, we say afterwards, oh, we've got to talk about this, that, or the other. Oh, well, never mind, there's plenty in there. It doesn't really matter, we've said enough. We've got our main thoughts out, no problem. And you'll hear me say that again on our upcoming podcast in a couple of weeks' time, which we've already recorded. But the point is relevant here because one of our worst omissions ever was not mentioning John Anderson, the referee, on our Gladiators podcast. He was very much the part of Gladiators that was most in the soup, I think, in the mid-90s and late 90s. That's why he's the one that James Fleet takes off on the Vicar of Dibley Christmas special, and we all go, oh, Gladiators, and things like that. So we did want to mention him here, and now we have.
He had his catchphrases, didn't he? Like, you will go on my first whistle is the famous one, and contender ready! Gladiator ready is another one.
Absolutely brilliant. And it was interesting when we were watching the first series a year and a half ago, how, as is inevitable, he hadn't really got into the part yet. Not exactly a part, is it, but a role in the show. And he was being a bit, oh yeah, ready, you got my first whistle. And he very soon gets excited and enthused about it.
He was saying different words as well, wasn't he? Like, you will begin on my first whistle, and you will start on my next whistle, things like that.
But ironically, by the time John Anderson's really getting into it and really perfecting his role and having a great time, the show itself, we thought, has completely jumped the shark, or certainly started to. After Series 4, I've noted here, which was the series we were just about to come on and watch on Challenge when we recorded our Gladiators podcast. But I think, Rosie agrees, it really goes downhill from Series 4 onwards, or from Series 5 onwards. I think ITV agreed as well, because the ratings apparently went steadily down from that point, and they didn't really perform well enough for Season 7, and that's why they made a truncated Series 8, which we'll hopefully be watching on Challenge soon, and then abandoned the whole thing.
Was that when they had the stupid North and South?
Now, I've written North and South on here, not in reference to that band, with Harriet Thorpe as their mother, or one of them.
Yes, one of them.
But that was, I think, Series 5, the North-South Challenge.
Yeah, what they did was they had this map of the United Kingdom and chopped off the bottom from the Cornish Peninsula to the bottom of East Anglia, I think.
I think it was actually the top of Norfolk. It was a sort of diagonal.
Was it as much as that? It certainly wasn't half, anyway.
No, it was inadequately little.
And that was the south, and Wales, Scotland, the rest of England, and Northern Ireland were the north. And what were they doing? They were against each other, weren't they? People from the north for one half, people from the south from the other half. And I truly believe it was the silliest reason they could come up with to have Eunice come along and be the northern coach. By the way, she was the winner of Series 3, and they had her in some special. But after she won, they kept finding reasons to bring her back, and they ended up with, oh yes, she's the northern coach. She was quite good on the telly. She was a very good contender as well, and deservedly won nearly everything she was in. The main series, one of two of the internationals. I think she did actually be runner-up in another one.
Eventually, and then she stopped doing it, spat the dummy.
So they would occasionally have some VT of her talking about the teams and the challenges, in which she admitted to cheating on Hang Tough, and I lost all respect for her then. And I was already quite bored of her, sorry Eunice, but I was. And she would say things amusingly in her Liverpool accent, but you do feel you've had enough of that after a while, don't you?
Yes, very much so. It's very arbitrary, all this north-south stuff that isn't really even north-south. It's a bit like the New Raven, crappy New Raven, putting a bunch of people together and saying, right, this is a team of, but they're actually all against each other.
And they ended up with North and South in the final, didn't they? And there was, by the way, a contestant, one of the Phils, who'd won a series, who was the Southern coach, and I don't think he got nearly as much screen time as Eunice.
But they did abandon that stupid arbitrary thing after one series, but it was already too late for the show, really, in many ways. I've got a few things on here that we didn't like from Series 5 onwards. The changing of the Eliminator too much is a problem, I think. It's alright putting in, taking out a couple of things, but by the time we get to Series 6, it's really a whole new challenge than it was in the first series, apart from a couple of elements, like the zip line and the travelator.
Again, very like Raven.
Yes, like Way of the Warrior, particularly. But the stupidest thing, I think, ever that's on the Eliminator, and I've made a note of here, is what they sometimes call Spaghetti Junction, or the Web Tangle, which is where they had to squirm through all these ropes, tangle of ropes, before doing the hand bike.
Sort of elastic, weren't they? So they would give a bit.
/ hand ladder stage. And really, the problem with that was it kind of eliminated any difference that the head starts made to the challengers. They both got stuck in the elastic and had to worm their way out and lose their shoes and things.
Well, one of them did get stuck and one of them didn't, so that one went ahead whether they'd had a head start or not. I did find it quite interesting to notice that the most successful tactic was to go all down one corner, but once you've noticed that, it really loses any interest.
They should have put it somewhere other than the Eliminator, really. Then it could be quite an interesting part of the challenge, but it shouldn't be completely nullifying the head starts that you've been working up to during the whole show. But they got rid of that after one series, but as I was saying, they made the Eliminator completely stupid anyway. I've written on here increasingly stupid challenges, and they are, aren't they? I hate that one in Series 7 where you go up on the turtle blimp sort of thing and have to bash each other.
Do you hate that one where they have to swing on the poles and grab the next pole?
Oh, that one! That's absolute nonsense.
I've forgotten the name of it now.
So have I. And even ones that we liked before they'd made changes to and added stupid rules to, like Pendulum with the stupid buttons to press. It was much better without those.
Yeah, you get extra points, and Gauntlet you get the point for each zone successfully negotiated, I'm not sure what the word I want is, but got through. But now isn't that a direct result of points being generally lower and someone saying, oh, it's no fun without huge scores, we need to give them the opportunity for more points? And that is because the contenders are of lower quality. You can see this by how long they flail around on the rope quite near the beginning of the Eliminator. But many of them say, when they're talking to the camera about their feelings, oh, I applied for Gladiators 3 years in a row and I finally got on. They're the blooming rejects from previous series.
Yeah, that's right. And all these additional points that you can get in the challenges is the reason why someone was saying in Series 7, oh, well, this person I'm playing got the highest score ever. And then you were saying, well, yes, that's because there's now twice as many points available. It's like saying Sarja didn't lose any lives on Raven, the reason being that there weren't any combat challenges and leader challenges. Not that Sarja wasn't a great warrior, but but comparing across seasons like that is really a valid thing to do.
They've made things safer as well, didn't they? Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm thinking about when TV goes horribly wrong, which we were watching last night when we were recording this, and there was a presenter who got smacked by the wing of an aeroplane which was driving along the runway, and some comedian was saying, health and safety, that's why, and you were saying, well, there's middle ground. I don't want anyone accusing me of not wanting people to be safe, that's why I'm saying all this, trying to cover myself. So maybe it's a good thing they made things safer, like pyramid, you're not allowed to throw them off after a certain height, whereas before you were allowed to throw them off right from the top of the pyramid. And the other one is poleaxe, where you climb the pole and you push the button and your opponent, the gladiator or the contender, falls a very great distance onto a huge mattress. And in other challenges you might fall over, perhaps from not quite so high up, and probably not as a total surprise because you're climbing and then your steps disappear. So what they did, rather than just have them go splat, was tether them so that they would fall gently, like on Leap of Faith on Raven or something. Which, okay, maybe it is safe, although I don't think anyone ever actually got hurt doing poleaxe. But prevention is better than cure, so, maybe it is a good thing, but it's not nearly as much fun to watch, is it?
I've got written on here, as you were saying, reject contestants keep turning up. It's no wonder they're not as good. They're all rejects from previous years. And gladiators, I've written. The gladiators aren't as good as they were in earlier series. The replacement gladiators they bring in. And, yeah, I really think it is a limp to the finish with the gladiators. And I can see why ITV axed it when they did. You were talking about the health and safety thing there. The other note I've written there is when they get rid of John Anderson saying 3, 2, 1, but just coming into go on combat challenges. And that was for safety reasons, we reckon, didn't we?
Yes, possibly safety, possibly to stop what happened with Warrior happening again, which I'll tell you about, whether it was unsafe or just inconvenient, or perhaps a combination of the two. But we hadn't seen Warrior much, had we?
He'd been injured during the series 6.
And then he made this appearance on Duel, and it was the last we saw of him. It was very much a cameo. What he did was hit the contender on the head with his stick before the whistle twice, and then forfeit the game, and that was it. So, yeah, it probably wasn't safe, was it, to get bashed on the head by a gladiator or a contender, anticipating the whistle. And as well as that, it does stop it from being a bit annoying and stupid happening another time.
And that's Gladiators. Reached a peak about when we were doing a podcast about it on this challenge run-through, Series 4 sort of time, Series 3, 4. And then, as I say, a limp to the finish, and there are some of the reasons why we believe it to be so. The Dreamstone. The thing that I was surprised that we hadn't mentioned on the Dreamstone podcast was actually the Nightmare Stone, which is the opposite of the Dreamstone, obviously. It's what Zordrak finds and utilises after he's been blasted off into space after the final confrontation at the end of the first series. But I always thought it was right that there should be a Nightmare Stone if there was a Dreamstone.
There should be one from the beginning, though, because before they conceive that there is a Nightmare Stone, Zordrak's got his Troggle Hunters, or whatever they call them.
The Argorables, yes, they're called in the show.
Yes, the Nightmares, and they're not from the Nightmare Stone, so it's like there's at least two sources of nightmares and only one source of dreams, and that doesn't make any sense, and I don't like that.
Yes, it's like you were saying they hadn't realised at the beginning that Zordrak was a disgraced dream maker and a renegade, and in that way he's the polar opposite of the dream maker, and he should have a polar opposite stone as well.
They just thought he was a big dragon or something.
So perhaps it needed a bit more thought about Zordrak and his origins right from the get-go. There we are, the Nightmare Stone mentioned now. Should have been there and was, but wasn't there as early as it should have been. It looked like a sort of Argorable with a sort of face and spikes and things. But the thing you really wanted to say extra about the Dreamstone is why Sergeant Blob is a good commanding officer, principally to Frizz and Nug.
Yes, I was talking about how I liked Blob and I found him amusing, but I forgot to say, I think I had realised, but then I just sort of forgot. He's also a good and a likeable character because he is a good sergeant to have in the army. He's always trying to motivate the men, for his nog and encourage them with encouraging words rather than I'm gonna beat the bejesus out of you and you'll get no food and that kind of thing if you don't do it, but brace up, you can do it kind of thing. And the other thing he does is that he always defends them to Urkgor. So Urkgor will come along saying, oh, Blob, you've asked this up, haven't you, you and your stupid subordinates? And Blob, rather than saying as Toad Air Marshal or someone might, oh, it's their fault, they did it, it wasn't me, they're such rubbish, he'll say something more like, you leave my men alone, Urkgor, they're doing their best, it's your fault, you're the crap one, and that kind of thing, which I think is very good, actually. And we were saying how the Urkneys aren't a warlike people, and that's really reflected in Blob's attitude to his role as army commander.
A very interesting and true point, I thought, when you made that to me, and it really does back up the fact for us anyway, that the baddies in the Dreamstone are a lot more interesting than the goodies. I can't really think of any analysis I would want to or feel able to go into about relationships between the goodies to that extent, because I don't think it really exists.
Yes, or the potential is there, but unrealised, like you were saying about the crying on the stone apple bit.
Yes, absolutely.
That's about as far as it goes, really.
So that perhaps really is everything we've ever thought about the Dreamstone, but if we come back to it in next year's update podcast, I guess we'll be proved wrong. Not that I imagine we're going to watch it again before then. And finally, a little addendum to our previous podcast on the Mummy franchise. The thing that I was surprised that we forgot to mention in that was Tut, the mongoose, who's the pet in the show. And we really did say a heck of a lot in the Mummy podcast, particularly about the cartoon. But I thought it would be remiss not to give Tut a little shout out here, because he could be annoying. Like Orko and He-Man, he avoids the trap of coming across like a stupid little bastard thing, like Snarf does in Thundercats. Sometimes they do find some good use for Tut as Alex's animal companion, and he's at least an unobjectionable and at most a positive part of the show, so I did just want to mention him here. Alex decides to call him Tut, obviously after Tutankhamun. That's something they don't spell out for us, but we can read in with our intelligence, and they're quite right to think that we would. And talking about Tut reminds me of the computer game of Mummy Secrets of the Magi, which I had a look at a playthrough of on YouTube at one point, and I did want to mention the video game because I thought, well, that's quite a good adaptation of the cartoon. You play as Alex, you go around beating the crap out of undead warriors and earning points and things, and it ends up with a final confrontation with Imhotep where you have to beat the crap out of him. If I was going to sit down and play the Mummy video game, that's who I'd want to play as and what I'd want to do. But I think Tut was quite well used in that in places. There was a few bits where you need to get something that's through these tiny bars or something, and you press the button to send Tut through to collect it. Reminds me of the Harry Potter computer games where you go up to this lectern and call Hedwig to do something for you. I thought that was a nice thing to include, something for Tut as he was there, as he was a part of the show, and Alex's friend and companion, to use him in the gameplay in that way. So there he is, a fairly well used mongoose in the cartoon and the computer game. A shout out to Tut, there it was. And there is the end of this update podcast. We'll be having another update podcast for 2018, either at the end of 2018 or during January 2019, which will be here before we barely even blink, I'm sure, where we'll hopefully get to discuss Watership Down and perhaps any other little addendums we forget while we're podcasting during the year, or new developments that we find interest us during that same time period. In the meantime, hopefully you'll keep joining us on the final Sunday of each month during 2018 for our regular podcasts, the first of which will be in a couple of weeks' time at the end of January, and as you may remember, it will be the second and concluding part of our Jim Cummings and Jeff Bennett cartoon podcast series, and the podcast is on
Earthworm Jim,
as you may remember. So do join us again for that. Until then, thanks for listening today, and good night out there.
whatever you are.